My husband tried to steal $4 million from me, claiming I had dementia. He wanted to lock me up in a nursing home and take everything I'd built over 30 years of hard work. I was sitting in that courtroom, listening to the judge go over every single lie Wesley had made up about me, feeling my world fall apart, when my 8-year-old daughter stood up and said something that changed everything. "Your Honor, can I show you something about my mommy's money that she doesn't know about?" I was in the Fulton County Family Court in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning I'll never forget. It was April 23, 2023. The room was freezing, that industrial air conditioning they keep on full blast, you know? I'd put on my navy blue blazer that I'd bought online a few months earlier, the one with that perfect tailored cut that made me feel like I had some authority. I remember when it arrived, I thought it was beautiful, elegant, but not too flashy. My lawyer, Dr. Abernathy, had advised me to dress professionally but discreetly. He'd said, "Regina, you need to look like the capable businesswoman you are, not the confused woman Wesley is painting you as." So there I was, in my navy blue blazer, my black dress pants, my hair pulled back in a flawless low bun, trying to take deep breaths and not just fall apart. But let me back up a little so you can understand how things got to this insane point. I'm Regina Williams, I'm 53 years old, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and up until 6 months before that hearing, my biggest worry was deciding which of my 6 beauty clinics needed a remodel. I had built an empire, you know, from scratch, literally from scratch. I started out as an esthetician in a tiny rented room in Bankhead when I was 22, back in 1993. Bankhead, you guys, one of the toughest neighborhoods in Atlanta, where you had to lock your door 3 times and pray you'd make it home with your purse still on your shoulder. But it was what I could afford back then. I studied, I specialized, I saved every penny, every single penny. While my friends were going out on weekends, I was taking courses, learning new techniques, building my clientele. At 28, in 1999, I opened my very first clinic. A tiny little place in Decatur, but it was mine. The smell of fresh paint that day, you guys, I will never forget it. It was the smell of victory. And from then on, I just kept growing. 30 years later, I had 6 clinics spread across Atlanta, Marietta, and Decatur. I employed 43 people. I was bringing in over $2 million a year. I had a beautiful house valued at $850,000 in a fancy suburb, with a garden and everything. I had investments, savings, retirement funds. I had made it. And then I met Wesley. I was 42 when I met him, back in 2013. It was January. I joined a new gym that had opened up near one of my clinics because my doctor told me I needed to exercise, that I was working too much, and my blood pressure was starting to creep up. And there he was, Wesley Thornton, 28 years old, way too handsome, tall, muscular, a perfect white smile, that confident personal trainer vibe who knows he's attractive, hair always perfect, beard always trimmed, smelled good. He started paying attention to me. You know when you're a woman in your 40s and a young, handsome man starts giving you attention? It's intoxicating. I'm not gonna lie, I liked it. After so many years focused only on work, after 2 relationships that didn't work out when I was younger, suddenly there was a man making me feel beautiful, desired, young again. Wesley was attentive. He'd ask about my day, send me good morning texts, take me out to nice restaurants. He said I was the most incredible woman he'd ever met, that my ambition and success were sexy, that he admired my strength. And me, like a fool, I believed every word. We dated for 2 years before we got married. My sister Denise had warned me, you know? She lived in Nashville at the time and came to visit when I told her I was getting married in 2015. I remember her sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and saying with that worried look on her face that I needed to be sure, that Wesley was 14 years younger than me, that he had nothing and I already had everything. Wasn't that a little strange? But I defended Wesley. I said age didn't matter, that what mattered was love, connection, that Wesley made me happy, and back then, he really did. Or at least I thought he did. We got married in 2015. It was a beautiful ceremony at a hotel in Buckhead. I paid for everything, of course, because Wesley was only making about $1,800 a month as a personal trainer. But I didn't care. I had enough money for both of us. After the wedding, Wesley quit his job. He said he wanted to support my career, that he could take care of the house, do the shopping, organize things while I focused on the clinics. And again, I thought that was wonderful. I finally had someone to share my life with. And then, in 2016, I got pregnant. You guys, that pregnancy was a miracle. I was 44 years old. The doctors had told me my chances were super low, that at my age the risks were high. But it happened. And when I held that positive pregnancy test in my hand, I cried. I cried tears of joy, of fear, of everything. Wesley seemed happy too. He'd put his hand on my belly, talk to the baby, say he was going to be the best dad in the world. And when Aria was born, in September of 2016, he really did seem like a devoted father. He changed diapers, woke up in the middle of the night, played with her. I'd look at him holding our daughter in his arms and think I'd made the right choice. But things started to change, little by little. First, it was the comments. Subtle, small. Wesley started saying things like, I was too tired and should let him handle things. Or that I'd been forgetting a few things lately and that it was okay, it was normal for my age. Or that he was sure I'd said I was going to do something yesterday but I hadn't. At first, I thought he was just being considerate, caring. But over time, it started to get into my head. Was I really getting forgetful? Was it menopause? Was it my age? I started to doubt myself, and that's when Wesley offered to help. He said he could take care of the household finances, that I already had enough to worry about with the clinics. He said he could pay the bills, manage the investments, handle the credit cards. And me, wanting to believe I had a real partner, I let him. It was the biggest mistake of my life. In the last 2 years before that hearing, between 2021 and 2023, Wesley took control of everything. He had access to my personal bank accounts. He had the credit cards. He paid the house bills. And me, busy with the clinics and taking care of Aria, I trusted that he was doing everything right. But he wasn't. In February of 2023, about 2 months before that court hearing, Wesley started to ramp up the manipulation. He started saying that I was really confused, that I needed to see a doctor, that maybe it would be good for me to talk to a therapist. He made appointments for me with some woman named Dr. Chloe. He said she was a therapist who could help me with stress, with the pressure from work, and I went. 3 times I went to that fancy office in Midtown. Dr. Chloe was a young, blonde, pretty woman, all polite. She asked weird questions, like asking me to say what day it was, to repeat 3 words after she said a bunch of other things, to draw a clock on a piece of paper. I thought it was all a little strange, but Wesley had insisted it was just a wellness assessment, that big companies offered it to their executives. I had no idea it was a trap, and then came the day I was served. It was a Tuesday, March 19th, 2023. I was at home. I'd just gotten back from the Marietta clinic. Aria was at school. Wesley had gone out to run some errands, he said. I was in the kitchen making some tea when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was a process server, a tall man in a uniform, holding a manila envelope. He asked if I was Regina Thornton. I said yes, and he handed me that envelope with an expression I'll never forget. It was pity. The man was looking at me with pity. I closed the door, sat down on the living room sofa, that gray velvet sofa I'd bought online that was the most comfortable thing in the world, and I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Divorce petition and request for conservatorship. Wesley Thornton versus Regina Thornton. My heart stopped. It literally stopped for a second. I started reading, and every line was worse than the last. Wesley was filing for divorce, but that wasn't all. He was asking for sole custody of Aria. And he was asking for a conservatorship over me. Conservatorship. Do you guys know what that is? It's when the court declares that you don't have the mental capacity to take care of yourself, to make your own decisions, to manage your own money. It's when they give control of your entire life to someone else. And his justification? Early onset dementia. Wesley was claiming, with medical reports attached, that I was suffering from early onset dementia, severe cognitive decline, and emotional instability, that I was a danger to myself and to our daughter, that I was no longer fit to manage a business empire, valued at $4.5 million. $4.5 million. He had put that number down on paper, like it was his. I felt my stomach turn. I got up from the sofa and ran to the bathroom, where I threw up everything in my stomach. My whole body was shaking. My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. It just couldn't. But it was. I went back to the living room and kept reading. The evidence Wesley had attached was devastating. There were pictures of me asleep on the sofa in the middle of the day with my mouth open, looking like someone who'd just given up. There were pictures of my kitchen completely trashed, with dirty dishes piled up, pots on the stove, garbage on the counter. There were bank statements showing absurd purchases, cash withdrawals, expenses of over $35,000 in 6 months on things I didn't even know what they were. And there was a psychological evaluation from that Dr. Chloe Brennan, the therapist I'd seen 3 times, saying that I exhibited clear signs of mental deterioration, paranoia, and emotional instability, that I represented a risk not only to the estate, but also to the safety of my own daughter. I felt rage. A rage I had never felt in my life, because I knew it was all a lie. Those pictures of me sleeping? They were after Wesley had started giving me some pills he said the doctor had prescribed for my blood pressure. Except those pills made me dizzy, tired, drugged up. I realized later that he'd never shown me a prescription. He just shoved the pills in my hand and said it was for my own good. Those pictures of the messy kitchen? Wesley had fired my cleaning lady, Mrs. Maria, who'd worked for me for years, without telling me. He said she had quit, but I found out later he'd let her go, claiming I didn't need the help anymore. Without Maria, I was trying to keep up with the house, the clinics, Aria, everything on my own. Of course, the house was a mess sometimes. And those bank statements? I had never made those purchases. Never. But it was my card. How was that possible? I grabbed my phone to call my lawyer, my accountant, somebody. But before I did, I decided to check my bank accounts through the app. I had a money market account, a savings account I kept about $450,000 in for emergencies, for Aria's college, for any unforeseen event. I opened the app, put in my password, and when the screen loaded, my blood ran cold. Balance, $15.42. $450,000 was gone. Just gone. I tried to access my other accounts, the business accounts, the investments, but all the passwords had been changed. I was locked out of my own accounts. At that moment, Wesley walked through the front door. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before, one of those expensive Italian ones that cost about $3,000. His hair was perfectly cut. He had that look of someone who'd just won the lottery. I stood up from the sofa holding the envelope, and I screamed in a way I'd never screamed in my life. I asked him what the hell this was, how he could have the nerve to do this to me, where my money was. And you know what he did? He smiled. A cold, calculated, cruel smile. And then he said something I'll never, ever forget. He said, "You're old, Regina. The market wants young people. Aria needs vitality, not a mother who'll be in diapers soon. Sign the conservatorship agreement, go to the retirement home I've picked out, and don't make this difficult." Retirement home. He wanted to lock me in a nursing home. I felt my legs get weak. I sat back down on the sofa because I thought I was going to faint. And Wesley continued, in that calm, cruel voice, explaining that he'd already transferred most of the money, that he'd already changed the passwords, that I had no access to anything. And with the medical reports he had, no judge was going to believe me. I'd be declared incompetent. He'd get Aria. He'd get the clinics. He'd get everything. And I would spend the rest of my life forgotten in a corner, taking pills to sleep. You guys, I looked at that man and I didn't recognize the person in front of me. That wasn't the Wesley I knew. Or maybe it was. Maybe he'd always been this and I just hadn't seen it. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake in the guest bed because I refused to sleep in the same room as him, thinking about what to do. I needed a lawyer. But how was I going to pay for a lawyer if he'd locked me out of my own money? The next day, I went to Dr. Marcus Abernathy's office. Dr. Abernathy was a lawyer who'd known my family for decades. He'd helped my dad with some legal issues years ago, and he'd helped me structure the contracts for my clinics when I started out. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. I walked into his office in Buckhead at 8 in the morning. His secretary tried to tell me he didn't have any available appointments, but I said it was an emergency, that I had to speak with him immediately. She must have seen the desperation on my face, because she let me in. Dr. Abernathy was a 68-year-old black man with completely white hair, glasses, always impeccably dressed in a suit. He welcomed me into his office, offered me coffee, and I just broke down. I told him everything. I showed him the lawsuit. I explained about the missing money, the locked accounts, the fake medical reports. He listened to everything in silence, taking notes. When I finished, he took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said in that deep, calm voice of his that this was serious, very serious, that what my husband was doing was fraud, embezzlement, and possibly abuse. But he'd prepared well. Those reports, those photos, those statements, all of it was going to weigh against me in court if we couldn't prove it was manipulated. I asked how much it would cost for him to represent me, because I had no access to my money. And he did something I'll never forget. He took my hand and said that he'd known me since I was a little girl with a dream, that he'd watched me build everything I had, and that he wasn't going to let some user destroy my life. He said we'd figure out the payment when this was all over, but for now, we were going to fight. And so the battle began. Dr. Abernathy filed the defense, contesting everything. He requested an independent medical evaluation, demanded an audit of the bank accounts, and questioned Dr. Chloe's impartiality. But Wesley had prepared well, very well. The weeks leading up to the hearing were the worst of my life. I was still living in the same house as Wesley because Dr. Abernathy said if I left, Wesley would use it against me, say that I'd abandoned Aria. So I stayed there, in the house I'd bought with my money, sharing space with a man who wanted to destroy me. The way Wesley treated Aria just broke my heart. He bought her the newest iPad, that iPad Pro that costs over $1,000, and would say in front of her that Daddy was giving her the future and that Mommy was living in the past and didn't even know the Wi-Fi password. He told her I was sick in the head, that I needed to go to a special place to rest, that soon he and she could travel the world with the money Mommy had saved up. I tried to talk to Aria, tried to explain that none of it was true, but she was too little to understand. She was only 6 years old. She was confused, scared. I could see in her eyes that fear of losing her mother, of losing her security. But there was one day, about 3 weeks before the hearing, that something strange happened. Wesley left the house without saying anything and went to pick Aria up from school. He never did that. It was always me or the nanny. But that day, he went, and they came back hours later. When they got home, I was in the living room. Aria ran straight to her room. Wesley walked past me with that smirk on his face, and as he got close, I smelled it. A perfume, a sweet, floral, young perfume, the kind that girls in their 20s wear. It wasn't a perfume I wore, definitely not. Wesley noticed that I'd noticed, and even had the audacity to lean in and whisper in my ear that that was the smell of something new, of someone with the energy to spend the money I'd saved up. That was it. Right there, I was sure. He wasn't doing this alone. There was someone with him, another woman. I started paying closer attention, and I noticed that Aria was hiding something. She had an old tablet, one I'd given her a couple of years ago when I bought a new one for myself. It was a cheap little tablet, cracked screen, slow. Aria kept that tablet under her pillow. Every time Wesley came into her room, she'd hide it. And every time I came in, she'd hide it too, but in a different way, like she was protecting a secret. I didn't ask her about it. I didn't want to scare her, but it stayed in the back of my mind. And then the day of the hearing arrived, April 23rd, 2023, Tuesday. I woke up at 5 in the morning, even though I'd barely slept. I showered, got dressed carefully, put on my navy blue blazer, tied my hair back. I looked in the mirror and told myself that I was strong, that I had built an empire, that I was not going to let him destroy me. But inside, I was terrified. We got to the courthouse at 8:30. Dr. Abernathy was already there with his briefcase full of documents. My sister Denise had driven up from Nashville to support me. And Aria was with me, of course, because even though it was a hearing about her custody, the judge had allowed her to stay in the gallery. The room was cold. That courthouse air conditioning that chills you to the bone. There were about 20 chairs in the gallery, mostly empty. The judge's bench up front, elevated. The lawyers' tables on each side. And in the middle, the witness stand. Wesley arrived with his lawyer, a guy named Cromwell, a tall, skinny man, about 50, with that arrogant posture of an expensive lawyer. The two of them sat on the other side of the room and whispered to each other, smiling, like this was all some big joke. Judge Morrison came in, a white man in his late 60s, gray hair, a serious expression. He sat down, organized the papers in front of him, and started the hearing. Wesley's lawyer, Cromwell, spoke first. And you guys, what that man said was just heartbreaking. He painted a picture of me as a woman in rapid mental decline, incapable of caring for herself, let alone a child. He talked about the photos, the bank statements, the absurd spending. He said I was a risk to the estate and to Arya's safety. He said Wesley only wanted to protect me, to put me in a suitable institution where I could receive treatment, while he took care of the business and Arya. Suitable institution, a nursing home. He was talking about locking me up in a nursing home. And then he called his first witness, Dr. Chloe Brennan. The woman who walked into that room made my blood boil and run cold at the same time. She was young, very young, about 28, maybe 30 at the most. Blonde, long, straight hair falling perfectly on her shoulders, flawless skin, a slender body in a red sheath dress that was elegant but definitely sexy. Black stilettos, a designer bag, perfect makeup with that dark red lipstick. But what made me sure, what confirmed everything, was the perfume. When she walked past my table to get to the witness stand, that wave of sweet, floral perfume hit me full force. It was the same perfume I had smelled on Wesley's shirt 3 weeks ago. It was her, the other woman. My husband's mistress was the psychologist who had diagnosed me with dementia. I looked at Wesley, and he looked back at me with that smirk. He knew I had figured it out, and he didn't even care. Dr. Chloe Brennan sat in the witness chair, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and started her performance. She talked about my supposed sessions with her, about the tests she administered, about my concerning cognitive deterioration. She said with that sweet, professional voice that in her expert opinion I was not fit to run a complex business, much less care for a child, that I needed intensive treatment in a suitable institution. Suitable institution. A nursing home. She was saying I needed to be committed. Dr. Abernathy did the cross-examination. He asked how much Wesley had paid for her services. $5,000. He asked if she had any personal relationship with Wesley beyond a professional one. She denied it, but I saw her glance quickly at Wesley before answering. It was a look that lasted less than a second, but I saw it, and it confirmed everything. After Chloe, it was my turn. Cromwell called me to the stand. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked to that chair. I raised my hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. And then the slaughter began. Cromwell asked me questions about dates, about bank transactions, about decisions I had supposedly made, and I couldn't answer most of them, because I really hadn't done those things. But how was I supposed to prove it? The documents were right there, with my signature, on my card. How could I prove it wasn't me? He showed a picture of my messy kitchen and asked if this was how I lived. I tried to explain about the cleaning lady, about Wesley firing her without telling me. But my voice came out nervous, desperate. He showed a receipt for a cash withdrawal of $8,500 and asked if I remembered doing it. I said no. He asked if I remembered buying a fur coat for $12,300. I said I'd never bought fur in my life. And then he said, with that tone of someone who's already proven their point, that I didn't remember anything, that I didn't know anything, and weren't those clear signs of memory problems. And I snapped. I know I shouldn't have. Dr. Abernathy had warned me to stay calm, but I couldn't help it. I screamed that I was being set up, that my husband was stealing my money, that all of it was a lie. And you know what Cromwell did? He took a step back, like he was afraid of me, and told the judge that he was seeing paranoia, baseless accusations, emotional outbursts, exactly what Dr. Brennan had described. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't want to cry, but I couldn't hold it back. It was too much. The humiliation, the injustice, the feeling of being buried alive in lies. Judge Morrison looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Pity? Suspicion? I didn't know. He made a few notes and said he would hear closing arguments after a recess. During the break, I went out into the hallway with Dr. Abernathy and Denise. I was destroyed. I knew I was losing. Everything was against me. Dr. Abernathy tried to console me, said we still had arguments, that he'd do his best, but I could see in his eyes that even he was worried. We went back into the courtroom. The judge returned, and then the closing arguments began. Cromwell spoke first. He summarized everything, painting that terrible picture of me as an incapable, unstable, dangerous woman. He asked the judge to grant full conservatorship to Wesley, give him sole custody of Aria, and authorize my commitment to a specialized institution. When he sat down, I felt like it was all over. My life, my work, my daughter, everything was about to be ripped away from me. Dr. Abernathy stood up to make his final defense. But before he could even start speaking, a child's voice cut through the silence of the room. Aria. My daughter had stood up from her chair in the gallery. She said, "Your Honor," in that tiny but firm little voice. Judge Morrison looked at her, surprised, and asked what she wanted. And then Aria spoke with a clarity that didn't seem like it belonged to a 6-year-old girl. She said, "Your Honor, can I show you something about my mommy's money that she doesn't know about?" The entire room fell silent. I looked at my daughter, completely confused. Wesley tensed up for the first time. Cromwell tried to object, but the judge raised his hand for silence. Judge Morrison looked at Aria carefully and said she could approach the bench. Aria walked to the front of the room. She was holding that old tablet, the one I'd given her years ago with the cracked screen and all. The bailiff took the tablet from her and connected it to the court system, projecting it onto the large screen on the wall. I had no idea what was on that tablet, but from the way Wesley had suddenly turned pale, he knew. And when the video started playing, my world turned upside down. The large screen on the courtroom wall lit up and began to show shaky images. It was a recording made in secret. You could tell by the low angle and the way the camera was a bit crooked. The image showed the living room of my house, that room with the gray velvet sofa I loved, the glass coffee table, the beige curtains. It was nighttime. You could tell from the artificial light of the lamps. And then Wesley walked into the frame. But he wasn't alone. Dr. Chloe Brennan was with him. And you guys, they weren't having a professional consultation. Not at all. Wesley had his arm around her waist, and she was laughing, all relaxed, holding a glass of wine. A glass of my expensive wine, that French wine that cost $200 a bottle that I kept in the cellar for special occasions. My stomach turned over. I looked at Wesley and he was frozen in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face pale. In the video, they sat down on the sofa. Wesley poured Chloe more wine and she rested her head on his shoulder. And then they started talking, and every word that came out of their mouths was a bomb exploding in that courtroom. Wesley said, in that relaxed voice of someone who thinks they're completely safe, completely alone, that he had transferred the last $150,000 from her investment fund that day, that they already had almost $500,000 in the secret account in the Cayman Islands. $500,000. He had stolen $500,000 from me and hidden it in an offshore account. Chloe let out a little laugh and asked about the clinics, when he would be able to get them in his name. Wesley took a sip of wine and answered with that "I've already won" smile. He said that as soon as the judge granted the conservatorship for mental incapacity, he was going to sell the entire brand to that group of investors from Miami. That he already had an offer of $4 million, that they wanted to expand south and her network was perfect, that they would take that $4 million, add it to what they'd already taken, and they'd have over $4.5 million just for themselves. $4 million. He was going to sell my life's work for $4 million and pocket all of it. But the worst was yet to come. Chloe asked, running her hand over his chest, what he was going to do with Regina after all this. Wesley shrugged, as if he were talking about what to do with a piece of old furniture. He said he was going to put her in a state-run nursing home, that there was one in Valdosta that was cheap, about $1,200 a month. that he'd give her some strong drugs to keep her quiet and doped up, that in 6 months she wouldn't even know her own name, and if anyone asked, he'd say the dementia progressed quickly, that no one would question it. I felt bile rise in my throat. He was planning to drug me, lock me in a cheap nursing home, and leave me there to rot. Chloe laughed. She laughed at that, and said that he was terrible, but she had to admit it was a brilliant plan. And then she asked about Arya. Wesley kissed her forehead and spoke in that affectionate voice, as if he were talking about a gift. He said Arya would stay with him, well, with the two of them, that Chloe would be a much better mother to her than Regina, younger, prettier, more fun. And with the millions they were going to have, they could hire expensive nannies and travel the world. Paris, London, Tokyo. Everything the old lady never had the guts to do because she was always worried about working. I looked at Arya. My daughter was standing next to the judge, watching the video with that serious expression. Tears were streaming down my face, but I didn't make a sound. I was in complete shock. The video continued. Chloe asked in that whiny voice, "What if she got suspicious? What if she tried to fight back?" Wesley gave that arrogant laugh of his and said she had no way to fight, that he'd already blocked all the accounts, changed all the passwords, altered the clinic documents so that on paper he appeared as the majority partner in some important transactions, that he'd forged her signature on transfers, that he'd even put strong sedatives in her blood pressure medicine bottle and replaced the real pills. That's why she was so tired, so confused, that she thought it was her age, menopause, but she had no idea he'd been drugging her for months. He'd admitted it. Admitted he forged documents. Admitted he drugged me. Admitted everything. Chloe asked one more thing about the reports she'd written, if the judge would believe them. Wesley pulled her closer and said of course he would, that she was a licensed professional, that the $5,000 he'd paid her was the best investment of his life, and when it was all over, they'd be rich, free, and the old lady would be locked in a nursing home room, drooling and forgetting how to even clean herself. And then he kissed her. A long, deep kiss. And they both laughed. Laughed at me, laughed at their plan, laughed at how they were going to destroy me. The video ended. The courtroom fell into absolute silence, a silence so deep you could hear people breathing. I looked around. The bailiff had his hand on his gun, tense. The court reporter's mouth was hanging open. Denise was crying in the gallery. Dr. Abernathy had closed his eyes and was shaking his head. And Judge Morrison? Judge Morrison was red with rage. The veins in his neck were bulging. His hands were shaking on top of his desk. He turned to Wesley and his voice came out in a tone I had never heard from a judge before. It was controlled rage, professional fury. He ordered Wesley to stand up. Wesley stood up, trembling. The lawyer Cromwell tried to say something, but the judge raised his hand, cutting him off. The judge continued, his voice echoing through the room. He said he'd had 42 years on the bench, 42 years seeing the worst sides of human nature. But what he had just witnessed was one of the most vile, most disgusting, most criminal things he had ever seen in his courtroom. That Wesley had tried to use the court, an institution of justice, as a tool to commit fraud, grand larceny, elder abuse, and conspiracy to steal millions of dollars from an innocent woman. Wesley tried to speak, tried to say he could explain, but the judge slammed his gavel with so much force the sound echoed like a gunshot. He told Wesley to shut up. The judge turned to the bailiff and ordered him to arrest Mr. Wesley Thornton immediately. The charges were aggravated fraud, embezzlement of funds exceeding $400,000, forgery of documents, poisoning with controlled substances constituting attempted elder abuse, perjury, and conspiracy to commit organized crime. Officer Barnes approached Wesley and took the handcuffs from his belt. Wesley tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The officer grabbed his arms and put the cuffs on with that metal sound I'll never forget. Click, click. Wesley looked at me with pure hatred, as if I had done something wrong, as if he were the victim. The judge wasn't finished. He pointed to Chloe Brennan, who had stood up and was trying to walk discreetly toward the door. He ordered her to come back immediately. Chloe froze. She turned around slowly, her face pale, the red lipstick suddenly looking too flashy, too guilty. The judge said with contempt that she had actively participated in a criminal scheme, that she had falsified medical reports, committed perjury in his courtroom, and conspired to destroy an innocent woman's life. He ordered Officer Barnes to arrest her too. Same charges, including professional fraud and criminal practice of her profession. Chloe started to cry. Those fake tears that manipulative women cry when they get caught. She tried to say she'd been coerced, that Wesley had forced her, but no one believed it. The video had shown her laughing, planning, actively participating. The officer cuffed her too. And there they were, the two who had planned to destroy me, in handcuffs in the front of the court. The judge looked at the lawyer Cromwell and asked if he had anything to say about presenting fraudulent documents to his court. Cromwell was sweating, stammered that he didn't know the documents were fake, that his client had assured him. But the judge said he was a lawyer with 28 years of experience, that he had a duty to verify the authenticity of the documents he presented, that he would be reported to the Georgia State Bar for a full investigation, and depending on the results, he could face suspension or disbarment. And he ordered him out of his courtroom. Cromwell grabbed his briefcase and practically ran out, his head down. The judge then turned to me, and for the first time, his expression softened. He asked me to approach. I stood up on shaky legs and went to the front. I stood before his bench, trying to process everything that had just happened. The judge spoke in a gentle voice that on behalf of his court and the justice of the state of Georgia, he apologized for what I had suffered, that no person should ever have to go through that. He picked up some papers and started signing as he spoke. He said he was denying completely, in every respect, the petition for divorce and conservatorship filed by Mr. Wesley Thornton. More than that, he was granting me sole, full, and irrevocable custody of my daughter, Aria Thornton. That Mr. Wesley Thornton was permanently forbidden from approaching me or the minor. That he had lost any and all parental rights. He signed more papers, saying that he was voiding all powers of attorney, bank access, and authority that Mr. Thornton had over my accounts and businesses, and that he was ordering an immediate freeze of all bank accounts belonging to Mr. Thornton and Miss Brennan, both domestic and international, that all stolen funds were to be traced and returned to me in full, with interest and adjustments. He looked at me and said that I would need a lawyer specializing in international asset recovery to trace the money sent overseas, but he assured me that the justice system would do everything in its power to recover every last cent. He went on to say that Mr. Thornton would face criminal charges for all the crimes committed, that given the severity, the calculated coldness, and the amount of money involved, he would be facing a significant sentence, and that he would personally recommend that there be no possibility of bail until the trial. He banged his gavel one last time and said the case was closed, that I was free, that I was safe, and that I was keeping everything that was rightfully mine. I collapsed, literally. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees right there in front of the judge's bench. Dr. Abernathy rushed over and held me. Denise ran from the gallery, and Aria, my tiny Aria, ran and threw herself into my arms. I held my daughter, and I cried. I cried like I had never cried in my life. I cried with relief, with happiness, with love for that brave little girl who had saved me. When I managed to control myself a little, I pulled Aria back just to look at her face and asked with a choked voice how she had recorded that and when. Aria wiped her tears with her little hands and explained in that tiny voice. She said it was 3 weeks ago that she'd come downstairs to get some water at night and had heard Daddy talking to that woman in the living room, that he was saying bad things about me, calling me old, saying he was going to take everything from me. And she had gotten angry, really angry, because I wasn't old. I was the most beautiful and smartest mom in the world. My heart broke and healed at the same time. Aria went on to explain that she'd remembered the old tablet I'd given her, the one with the camera, that she had gone upstairs, gotten it, and left it recording hidden under the coffee table, that they didn't see it, and it recorded everything. She said she'd watched it the next day and got scared, but she kept it because she knew one day she'd need to show someone that Daddy was lying about me. I hugged my daughter so tight I thought I would break her. That 6-year-old girl had been smarter, braver, and more heroic than any adult in that room. Dr. Abernathy put a hand on my shoulder and said we needed to go to the bank immediately, that we had to re-establish my access, block any pending transactions, and start the international tracking of the funds. I nodded. I was still dizzy, still processing, but I knew he was right. The battle in court was over, but the battle to get my money back was just beginning. We left the courthouse. The Atlanta sun was bright, hot. It was noon. Inside, Wesley and Chloe were being taken to the police station in separate squad cars in handcuffs. I saw them being put in the cars. Wesley looked at me one last time through the car window, and I saw in that look not regret, not remorse, but hatred. Pure hatred. But I didn't feel afraid anymore, because he had no more power over me. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Dr. Abernathy put me in touch with a firm that specialized in asset recovery. A man named Richard Dalton, an expert in tracing offshore money, took the case. He had a team of financial investigators and international lawyers. We went to the bank. The manager, when he saw the court order from Judge Morrison, turned pale. They had allowed Wesley to make huge transfers without notifying me properly. The bank was going to have to answer for negligence too. But first, we needed to understand the extent of the damage. Richard Dalton and his team started digging. And you guys, what they found was worse than I had imagined. Wesley had started stealing from me 2 years ago. 2 years. Since 2021, shortly after Arya turned 5. He started with small amounts. $500 here, $1,000 there. Amounts I wouldn't notice missing from an account that moved thousands every month. But over time, he got bolder. He transferred $50,000 from the money market account, saying it was for an investment. He transferred $80,000 from a fund, saying it was to renovate the house. He bought a $45,000 car, saying it was for me, but put it in his name. He opened corporate credit cards and spent over $60,000 on expensive restaurants, hotels, jewelry, all for Chloe, we later found out. In total, over 2 years, Wesley had embezzled, stolen, and illegally transferred exactly $487,000, almost $500,000. And of that, $320,000 had been sent to an account in the Cayman Islands in the name of a shell company he had created. The rest had been spent. Richard Dalton filed international lawsuits to freeze and recover the funds. He said it would take a few months, maybe a year, but that it was possible to recover most of it, since we had a criminal court order proving the fraud. In the meantime, I had to rebuild. I went to each of my 6 clinics. I spoke with every manager, every employee. Some had suspected something was wrong when Wesley started showing up, giving orders without my authorization. But he had painted me as sick, fragile, and they had been afraid to cross me. I found out that Wesley had tried to put his name as a partner in 2 of the clinics, forging my signature on corporate amendment documents. Thank God the accountant had found it strange and hadn't registered it with the state yet. He had sent me emails asking about it, but Wesley, who had access to my email, deleted everything. I fired 3 people who had been complicit with Wesley, people who had helped him hide information from me, who had lied about where I was or what I had authorized. I didn't feel sorry for them. Anyone who conspires against their boss doesn't deserve their job. I changed every password, all of them, bank, email, social media, the clinic systems. I canceled all the cards, opened new accounts. Basically, I rebuilt my financial security from the ground up. And then there was Wesley and Chloe's criminal trial. The district attorney, a serious man named James Fletcher, took the case personally. He said that cases of spousal financial abuse were far too underestimated by the justice system, and that he was going to use Wesley's case as an example. The trial took place in August of 2023, 4 months after the initial hearing. Wesley tried to make a deal. He offered to confess to everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. But Prosecutor Fletcher refused. He wanted a full trial, with a jury, the whole thing. I had to testify. It was hard. Very hard. Sitting in that witness chair again, with Wesley sitting there staring at me with that hatred, reliving everything. But I did it. I told them everything. About the manipulation, the drugs, the gaslighting, the theft. The jury took only 2 hours to deliberate. Guilty on all charges. Wesley was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. The judge was tough. He said that Wesley had coldly planned to destroy a woman's life, steal her fortune and her daughter, and that this type of crime required an exemplary punishment. Chloe got 8 years. She tried to argue that she was a victim too, that Wesley had manipulated her. But the video clearly showed her laughing, planning, participating. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. The lawyer Cromwell was suspended from the bar for 3 years and fined $50,000. He lost his practice, his reputation, everything. And me? I started to rebuild my life. I sold that house. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room reminded me of the lies, the manipulation, the nightmare. I sold it for $950,000, about $100,000 more than I'd paid, because the real estate market had gone up. I bought a beautiful property in Druid Hills, a historic Atlanta neighborhood. It was a Victorian house from 1918 that needed renovations, but had a soul, you know? It had history. It had huge windows, a garden with old trees, an attic that Aria loved. I paid $700,000 for the house and invested another $150,000 in the renovation. It was my dream house, and it was just mine and my daughter's. Aria started therapy. Even though she was the hero of the story, she had been through trauma, seeing her father arrested, hearing all of that. Her psychologist, Dr. Martinez, a wonderful 50-year-old Puerto Rican woman, worked with her for months. And little by little, my little girl went back to being a kid. She started smiling again, playing, dreaming. I went to therapy too, because I needed it. I needed to understand how I had let a man into my life and almost destroy everything. I needed to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I needed to heal. 6 months after that court hearing, I woke up one morning in October of 2023 and realized something. For the first time in years, I had slept through the entire night without nightmares, without waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, thinking I was going to hear Wesley's voice in the hallway, without that constant knot in my stomach. I opened my eyes in my new bedroom, in that beautiful Victorian house in Druid Hills, and the morning sun was streaming through the white linen curtains I had chosen myself from a charming little shop in Virginia Highland. And I thought, I did it. I survived. But surviving was just the beginning. Now I had to really live again. The recovery of the money was progressing, but slowly. Richard Dalton, that asset tracking expert, called every week with updates. He and his team had managed to freeze the $320,000 that was in the Cayman Islands account. But the process to repatriate the money was complicated, full of international bureaucracy. He estimated that by the end of the year, we'd be able to get back at least $280,000. The rest would be eaten up by legal fees and processing costs. Of the $167,000 that Wesley had spent, a portion was recovered through the sale of assets he had bought. The $45,000 car he'd put in his name, seized and auctioned. I got $38,000 back. The jewelry he'd bought for Chloe with my money, all traced through the credit card receipts, seized and sold. Another $22,000 back. But there was money that was never coming back. Expensive dinners, luxury hotels, trips. Money that had literally been eaten, drunk, and slept away. About $40,000 that just vanished. In total, by January of 2024, I had recovered approximately $340,000 of the $487,000 stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And considering that many victims of marital fraud never recover anything, I was lucky. But the truth is, I didn't need that money to survive. The clinics were still running, still profitable. I had gone back to working actively, visiting each location at least twice a week, rebuilding connections with suppliers, personally meeting every new employee who had been hired in the last 2 years while I was being manipulated to stay away. And it was in this process that I discovered something that made me furious and at the same time proud. My managers, the 5 women who ran my main clinics, had formed a kind of silent resistance against Wesley. They had realized something was wrong when he started showing up, giving orders, cutting costs, changing suppliers. And they, without telling me anything, because Wesley had convinced them I was sick and couldn't be stressed, had started documenting everything. It was Simone, the manager of the Buckhead location and my employee for 12 years, who told me. We were sitting in her office one afternoon drinking coffee, and she pulled a folder from a locked file cabinet. Inside were copies of emails, meeting notes, even some audio recordings of conversations Wesley had on the phone using the clinic's office. Simone said, in that firm voice of hers, that she knew I wasn't well, but she also knew I wasn't crazy, that there was something wrong with that man. So she and the girls had started saving everything, just in case. That extra documentation had been used by the prosecutor in Wesley's criminal trial. It had helped prove a pattern of behavior, premeditation, and I never knew until months later. I hugged Simone and cried. I gave her and the other 4 managers a raise. It wasn't just for the documentation, but because they had kept the clinics running smoothly despite all of Wesley's interference. They had protected my legacy. But not everything was about financial recovery. There was the emotional part too, and that was harder. I was ashamed. You know that kind of shame that eats you up inside? Because everyone knew. The case had been in the papers. Atlanta businesswoman nearly robbed by younger husband. Personal trainer tries to steal millions from wife. Woman saved by 6-year-old daughter. The headlines were sensational. Some even painted me as a pathetic victim. I got looks on the street, in restaurants, at the gym, looks of pity. And I hated it. I hated being seen as a victim. Because I wasn't a victim, I was a survivor. But people didn't understand the difference. There was this one time, in November of 2023, I went to a business event in Atlanta. It was one of those fancy networking dinners at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I was wearing a long black dress I'd bought online, an elegant satin dress with a perfect fit, and I had done myself up nicely. Hair, makeup, everything. I wanted to show that I was fine, that I was strong. But when I walked into the ballroom, the conversation stopped. People literally turned to look at me. And then the whispering started. I could see mouths moving behind champagne flutes, eyes following me around the room. And I knew what they were saying. That's her, the one whose husband tried to rob her. Poor thing. I almost left, almost grabbed my purse and walked out. But then I thought, no, I'm not going to let their shame stop me from living my life. I didn't do anything wrong. Wesley did. So I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and walked to the bar. I ordered a glass of red wine. And when a woman I vaguely knew from other events came over with that look of fake concern and said she'd heard what happened and asked how I was doing, I looked her straight in the eye and answered in a firm voice that I was doing great, that my ex-husband was in prison, that I had recovered my money, and that my clinics were growing by 20% this year. And then I asked her how she was. The woman was speechless, and I saw in her face that moment of recalibration. She had expected to find a broken, humiliated woman, and instead, she found a confident businesswoman. She stammered something about being fine and walked away. From that moment on, things changed. People realized I didn't want pity. I wanted respect, and slowly I started to get it. But the hardest part of it all wasn't dealing with strangers. It was dealing with relationships, because after Wesley, I was terrified of trusting anyone again, especially men. There were a few who tried to get close. James, the owner of a gym chain, approached me at an event in December of 2023 and asked me to dinner. He was attractive, successful, 53 years old, divorced, a similar profile to mine. But when he put his hand on my arm in a way that felt too familiar and said that a woman like me shouldn't be alone, I felt my stomach clench. I gently removed my arm and said that I appreciated the interest, but I was very happy being alone. And it was true. I was, because for the first time in my life, I didn't need a man to feel complete. I had Aria, I had my clinics, I had my peace, and no fancy dinner was worth the risk of putting all of that in jeopardy again. But there was one relationship I needed to fix. My relationship with myself. Therapy with Dr. Patricia Williams, my psychologist, was essential. Dr. Patricia was a 61-year-old black woman with graying dreadlocks and a firm but loving manner. She didn't let me feel sorry for myself, but she also didn't minimize the trauma. In one of our sessions, in December of 2023, I was venting about how stupid I felt for not seeing the signs sooner. and she stopped, took off her glasses, and said, "You want to know why you didn't see them? Because you're a good person. You're trusting. You're generous. And those are wonderful qualities." She said the problem wasn't that I had those qualities. The problem was that bad people like Wesley use those qualities against you. But it wasn't my fault. It never was. That lifted a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. The guilt. I had spent months blaming myself for being deceived, but Dr. Patricia was right. I hadn't done anything wrong. Wesley had. And over time, with therapy, with the support of Aria, Denise, and my friends, I began to truly heal. In January of 2024, 9 months after the hearing, I decided to do something I'd been thinking about for weeks. Expand. I had 6 clinics, all successful, but I knew there was room to grow, especially since during all of Wesley's manipulation, I had stopped innovating, stopped looking for new opportunities. Now, with a clear head, I saw possibilities everywhere. I called my team of managers and my accountant, Mr. Reginald, an extremely competent Indian man who had helped me a lot during the financial recovery. We held a strategic planning meeting. I said I wanted to open 2 more locations by the end of the year, one in Sandy Springs and another in Alpharetta, that I had already done the market research, that there was demand, that there was a market, and that we had the infrastructure. Mr. Reginald, always conservative, frowned and asked if I was sure if it was financially viable. He said I had enough liquidity, especially with the recovered money being repatriated. But he asked if, after everything that had happened, it wouldn't be better to consolidate first. I looked at him and said with conviction that I had spent almost 2 years frozen, letting a man convince me that I was getting too old, too slow, too confused to work, that I wasn't going to waste another second of my life playing small, that I was going to grow, because I could. And that's what I did. In February of 2024, I signed the lease for a commercial space in Sandy Springs. It was a beautiful, newly renovated space with large windows and ample parking. Rent was $6,500 a month, but it was worth it. I invested $120,000 in renovations and equipment. In March, I closed the deal for the Alpharetta location, a smaller, more boutique space focused on high-end treatments. Rent was $5,000, investment was $90,000, and in the process, I discovered that I loved it. I loved planning, designing the layout, choosing the equipment, hiring the team. It made me feel alive, productive, powerful. The new clinics opened in June and July of 2024, and they were immediate successes. Within 3 months, both were already operating in the black. My annual revenue went from $2,200,000 to almost $3 million. I had 8 clinics now. 8. At 53, I was more successful than ever, and on my own, with no man helping me. But it wasn't all work. I also learned to live. In May of 2024, I did something I had never done. I took a real vacation. Not one of those quick weekend trips, but a long vacation. 2 weeks. I took Aria to Disney World in Orlando. I know it sounds cliché, but it was perfect. We stayed at the Grand Floridian Resort, that luxurious hotel inside the park. I spent about $8,000 on the whole trip, and it was worth every penny. Seeing Aria running from ride to ride, with those Minnie Mouse ears on her head, laughing, screaming with joy, with no shadow of trauma on her face, that was worth more than any $1 million. And I had fun too. Me, who had always been so serious, so focused, I bought a silly Mickey Mouse t-shirt from the park's gift shop, a light blue shirt with a drawing of Mickey giving that huge smile, and I wore it all day without shame. I ate cotton candy. I took pictures with the princesses. I went on the roller coasters even though I'm afraid of heights, because I realized that for years I had forgotten to be happy. I had been so busy building an empire, and then so busy surviving a betrayal, that I had forgotten to simply live. And there, in that cheesy and magical amusement park, I gave myself permission to be happy. Aria, one night, after we got back to the hotel, and she was already in her pajamas, came and sat next to me on the bed. She was 7.5, growing up so fast, and she said that I looked prettier. I laughed and asked, "Prettier how?" And she answered with that wisdom that kids sometimes have. She said prettier because I was happy. that when Daddy was there, I always looked tired, that now I smiled more. My heart ached and filled up at the same time, because she was right. I was happy, for real. We came back to Atlanta renewed, and life went on, but in a better way. In July of 2024, I got a call from Dr. Abernathy. He said he needed to talk to me in person, that he had some news. I got a little tense, because whenever lawyers say that, you never know if it's good or bad. I went to his office the next day, and the news was unexpected. Dr. Abernathy told me that Wesley had tried to file an appeal of his sentence. He was claiming that the 15-year sentence was disproportionate, that he deserved a reduced sentence, but the appeal had been denied, unanimously. The appeals court had even made a comment in their opinion saying that, on the contrary, the sentence had been fair and appropriate given the premeditated cruelty of the crime. Wesley was going to serve the full 15 years. With good behavior, maybe he'd get out in 12, but no less than that. I asked about Chloe, and Dr. Abernathy said it was the same thing. She had tried to appeal too. Denied. 8 years, she'd serve at least 6 with good behavior. I nodded. Part of me was satisfied. Justice had been served, but another part of me just felt empty, because no prison sentence was going to give back the time I lost, the peace that was stolen, the trust that was broken. But at least they were going to pay. In some way, they were going to pay. Dr. Abernathy then said one more thing. Wesley had formally relinquished all parental rights to Aria. He had signed the papers in prison. He would no longer have any legal rights over her. No visits, no decisions, nothing. She was completely mine. I felt such a huge sense of relief that I almost fell apart right there, because that had been my biggest worry, that one day, when he got out of prison, he would try to get back into Aria's life, try to manipulate her, use her. But now that couldn't happen. Legally, he was no longer her father. When I told Aria that night, she was quiet for a while, and then she asked if that meant he wasn't going to try to take me away from her anymore. I pulled her onto my lap, even though she was getting big, and said that it meant no one ever again would be able to take us from each other, that it was just me and her now, and that we were enough. She hugged my neck and whispered that we were more than enough, that we were awesome. And she was right. We were awesome. In the following months, I started doing something I had never done before, using my story to help other women. In September of 2024, I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship event in Atlanta. The theme was resilience in business, and I spoke. I told my story. Not all the sordid details, but enough. I talked about how I built my company, about how I almost lost everything, about how I recovered. And at the end, when I opened it up for questions, a young woman raised her hand. She was in her early 30s, her eyes were red, and she said that she thought her husband was doing the same thing to her, that he was taking control of the accounts, telling her she was incompetent. But she was scared of ending up with nothing if she confronted him. And she asked what to do. And right there, I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to thousands of women. Women being manipulated, robbed, discredited by unscrupulous partners. I gave her my card and told her she should document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every email. Keep copies in a place he couldn't access. Consult a lawyer discreetly. And when she had enough proof, act. But act with strength, with intelligence, and with legal help. That she didn't deserve to be robbed. No woman did. After the event, 5 other women approached me with similar stories. I gave them Dr. Abernathy's contact information, and I later found out that he took on 3 of those cases, all successful. That gave me a new purpose. It wasn't just about having successful clinics. It was about using my platform, my story, my success to empower other women. In October of 2024, I started a small fund, $25,000 initially, to help women who were victims of financial abuse pay for lawyers, because I had been lucky. Dr. Abernathy had represented me with no upfront payment. But most women don't have that. Most get stuck because they can't afford a legal defense. The fund was small, but it was something, and I planned to grow it over time. life had changed completely. A year and a half later, in October of 2024, I had 8 clinics, $3 million in annual revenue, my daughter safe with me, a beautiful house, and a new purpose. I looked in the mirror every morning and saw a different woman. Stronger, wiser, more cautious, yes, but also braver. Because I had faced the worst and survived. And if I could survive Wesley, I could survive anything. I had sworn to myself, after everything I went through with Wesley, that I would never get seriously involved with a man again. That I would focus on myself, on Aria, on my businesses. That romance wasn't worth the risk. And for a whole year, I kept that promise. I had friends. I had my daughter. I had my work. And that was enough. Until January of 2025, when I met Nathan. It was nothing dramatic, nothing out of a movie. It was actually very simple, very everyday. I was at the grocery store, that Whole Foods in Buckhead, shopping on a Saturday morning. It was early January, still had that New Year vibe in the air, everyone with their resolutions to eat healthier. I was in the organic produce section, trying to decide between 2 types of kale, when I accidentally dropped my purse. Everything spilled onto the floor. Wallet, keys, lipstick, pens, that whole mess of stuff we carry around. And I bent down to pick it up, kind of embarrassed, when a man's hand appeared in my field of vision holding my wallet. I looked up and saw a black man, tall, in his early 60s, with short gray hair, modern framed glasses, and a kind smile. He was wearing jeans and a light blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He had that air of a professor or a professional, you know? He said he thought this was mine. I took the wallet and thanked him, a little flustered. He helped me pick up the rest of my things, and when he was done, he joked that women's purses were like the Bermuda Triangle. You never knew what you'd find inside. I laughed. It was a genuine, spontaneous laugh, and I realized it was the first time in a long time that I had laughed at a joke made by a man without automatically going on the defensive. I thanked him again and was about to continue my shopping, but he said, "I'm Nathan, by the way, Nathan Coleman." I hesitated. My first instinct was to brush it off, to walk away, but something about him made me stop. Maybe it was his gentle manner. Maybe it was the fact that he had gray hair and wasn't trying to hide his age. Maybe it was just his sincere smile. So I said, "I'm Regina Williams." He said it was a pleasure, and asked if, since we'd already gone through the embarrassing part of picking my stuff off the floor, he could ask me a question. I tensed up immediately and said it depended on the question. And he asked which of those kales was better for making green juice, that he was trying to adopt a healthier diet, but all those things looked the same to him. I relaxed. He wasn't asking for my number, he wasn't asking if I was married. He was just asking about kale. And I, who had made my share of green juices in recent months trying to be healthier, explained the difference between Tuscan kale and curly kale. Which one was better for juice, which was better for salads. We stood there talking about vegetables for about 5 minutes. And it was pleasant, light, no pressure. When I said I had to go, he nodded and said it was a pleasure to meet me and thanked me for the lesson on kale. And that was it. No asking for my number. No insisting. He just said goodbye and went to the other side of the store. I thought about that for the rest of the day, not because I was romantically interested, but because it had been a normal, pleasant human interaction with no apparent ulterior motives. And it had been a long time since I'd had that with a man. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was at the same grocery store again, because yes, I'm a creature of habit and I always shop at the same place at the same time. And guess who I ran into in the fruit section? Nathan. He saw me first and smiled, calling me the vegetable expert. I laughed and called him the healthy eating student and asked how the diet was going. He said it was awful, that he'd made that green juice I recommended and almost died, that it was terrible. I agreed that it was, in fact, terrible, but that it worked. We talked again, this time about fruit, about the difficulty of maintaining a healthy diet, about how we get older and our bodies start demanding more care. It was a casual conversation between 2 people at the same stage of life-sharing experiences. And again, at the end, he said goodbye without asking for anything. The third time we met at the same grocery store, and at this point, I was starting to suspect it wasn't just a coincidence. He finally made a move, but not in the way I expected. He said he was going to be honest, that he'd been shopping there every Saturday for 2 years, that I had started showing up about 4 weeks ago, and that he had adjusted his schedule so he might run into me again. My whole body tensed up. Red alert. Here comes the part where he asks for my number, tries to convince me to go out with him, reveals that he's looked me up and knows I have money. But Nathan continued, explaining that he'd done it because I seemed like an interesting person, and he enjoyed our conversations. But he'd realized now that maybe it was weird, kind of stalkerish even. So he was going to stop. He didn't want to make me uncomfortable. That it was just nice to talk to someone who didn't treat him like he was too old to still be alive, you know? And there was something so sincere, so genuine about it, that my defenses lowered a little. I asked him how old he was. He said 63. I said I was 53. He said that was a good age. I agreed. We were silent for a moment. And then I did something that surprised myself. I said there was a coffee shop nearby, 2 blocks away. That next Saturday, if he wanted to get a coffee after shopping, I'd be up for it. His eyes lit up, and he asked if I was serious. I said yes, but it was just coffee, and I was paying for my own. He laughed and said, "Deal." And so began something. I didn't know what it was yet, but it was something. The following Saturday, early February of 2025, after shopping, we went to the coffee shop. A charming little place with wooden tables and that good smell of fresh coffee. We ordered our coffees. I paid for mine, he paid for his, as agreed, and sat down. And we talked. For real. Not that first date conversation full of invasive questions, but a real conversation. Nathan was a retired architect. He had worked for 38 years at a big firm in Atlanta, had retired 3 years ago. He had been a widower for 8 years. His wife, Sarah, had died of breast cancer. He had 2 adult children, one living in Chicago and the other in Seattle, and 5 grandchildren he visited when he could. When he asked about me, I took a deep breath, and I told him. Not everything, but parts. I told him I was a businesswoman, owner of a chain of beauty clinics, that I had an 8-year-old daughter, that I was divorced, and that the divorce had been complicated. I watched his reaction carefully. Any change in his eyes? Any sign of sudden interest when I mentioned the businesses? But no, he just nodded empathetically and said that divorces were usually complicated, and he changed the subject, respecting my boundaries. We stayed in that coffee shop for 2 hours. We talked about Atlanta, about how the city had changed over the years, about kids, about the worries of raising them in this crazy world, about aging, about health, about this stage of life where you're not young anymore but you're not old yet either. And when we said goodbye in the parking lot, Nathan said that it had been really nice, that he appreciated me agreeing to it. I thanked him too. He asked if we could do it again next Saturday. I hesitated, that little voice in my head screaming caution. But another voice, softer, more hopeful, said, "Why not?" So I said, "Maybe." And so it became a routine. Every Saturday, shopping and then coffee. Sometimes we'd sit for an hour, sometimes for 3. We talked about everything. Politics, religion, family, work, dreams, regrets. Nathan was different. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't talk about money, achievements, material things. He talked about real things, about how he missed his wife, about how the loneliness of retirement was harder than he had imagined, about how he was trying to find purpose in this new phase of life. And I started to open up too, slowly. I told him about the clinics, about how I had built everything from scratch, about Aria and how amazing she was. And in March of 2025, almost 2 years after that terrible court hearing, I told him about Wesley, not in sordid detail, but enough, that my ex-husband had tried to rob me, manipulate me, that he had gone to prison, that because of it, I was very cautious with men now. Nathan listened to everything in silence. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, processing, and then he said he was sorry I had gone through that no one should have to, and that he completely understood if I couldn't trust him or any man again. But he wanted me to know that he wasn't Wesley, that he didn't want my money, that he had his retirement, his paid-off house, his investments, that he was financially stable, and more importantly, that he had been raised by his mother, a strong black woman who always taught him to respect women, especially black women who built their own empires, that he admired me, my strength, my resilience, and that he would like to continue getting to know me at whatever pace I felt comfortable with. That completely disarmed me, because he wasn't offended by my caution. He understood. In April of 2025, exactly 2 years after that hearing that changed my life, Nathan invited me to dinner. A real restaurant, not just coffee. I accepted, but I made it clear that I would drive myself and that we would each pay our own bill. He agreed without a second thought. The dinner was at an Italian restaurant in Midtown. Nothing too fancy, nothing trying to impress. Just a nice place with good food. And we talked like we always did, but there was a different energy, a growing intimacy. At the end of the night in the parking lot, Nathan walked me to my car. And when I opened the door, he asked if he could give me a hug. Just a hug. I hesitated. My whole body still had that automatic response to pull back, but I also wanted to. I wanted human contact, affection, without the complications, without the fear, so I said he could. It was a simple hug, warm, no strings attached, and it lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it was nice, comforting. When we pulled apart, he smiled and said goodnight. In the following weeks, we started seeing each other beyond Saturdays. A dinner on Wednesday, a movie on Sunday, a walk in the park on Friday afternoon, and I realized I was enjoying it. Enjoying his company, the ease of conversation, the laughter, but there was still that fear in the back of my mind, that fear of being deceived again. It was in May of 2025 that I decided to do what I had to do, investigate. It might sound awful, distrustful, but I needed to know, so I hired a private investigator, a discreet man recommended by Dr. Abernathy. I asked him to investigate Nathan Coleman. Financial history, criminal record, everything. 2 weeks later, I got the report, and it was clean, completely clean. Nathan had exactly the life he said he had. A stable retirement fund of $320,000. His own home, valued at $450,000. No mortgage, no debt, no lawsuits, no criminal record. A widower for 8 years, just as he said. Wife deceased from cancer. He was exactly who he said he was. That should have relieved me. And it did. But it also made me feel guilty. Because investigating someone behind their back is not a nice thing to do. So I decided to be honest. At our next dinner, at the end of May, I told him. I said that I had investigated him, that I had hired a private investigator, that I needed to know if he was for real. Nathan was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath, expecting anger, offense. But he said he understood, completely, that I had been through a serious trauma, and that being cautious wasn't an insult, that he wasn't mad. In fact, he was even relieved. I asked, relieved why? And he explained that he was relieved because now I knew he was who he said he was, and that maybe that meant I could trust him a little more. My heart ached, because he was right, and that changed something in me. It didn't completely take away the fear, but it eased it. That night, for the first time, I let Nathan kiss me. It was in the parking lot, after dinner. He asked if he could kiss me, and I, after a moment, said yes. It was a soft, gentle, unhurried kiss, and it had been so long since someone had kissed me with affection, without an agenda, without manipulation, that I almost cried. When we pulled apart, Nathan held my face in his hands and said that I was an extraordinary woman. And I, for the first time in years, believed it when someone said that. In June of 2025, Nathan met Aria. I had held off on this for months because protecting my daughter was my absolute priority. But Nathan understood. He never pushed, never asked when he would meet her. He waited until I was ready. We planned something casual, a picnic at Piedmont Park on a Sunday afternoon. No pressure, no, this is Mommy's boyfriend, just, this is my friend Nathan who I want you to meet. Aria, who had become very protective of me since the Wesley episode, was clearly suspicious. She was 8.5 now, and no fool. She knew Nathan was more than a friend, but Nathan was perfect. He didn't try to force intimacy. He didn't try to be the cool dad. He was just himself. He talked to Arya about school, about what she liked to do. He asked if she liked to draw. Yes, and he showed her some architectural drawings he had done that he brought because he thought she would find them interesting. And Arya, little by little, thawed out. She asked questions about where he had met me, if he had kids, if he liked dogs. Nathan did. He had a Labrador named Duke. At the end of the picnic, when Nathan said goodbye and left, Arya turned to me and said he seemed nice. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. In the following weeks, Nathan started to appear more in our lives, not living with us, not intruding, but present. A dinner here, a movie there, always respectful, always kind. And Arya started to like him, for real, especially after he took her and her friend to an art exhibit and then for ice cream, and not because I asked, but because he wanted to. In July, I finally let Nathan into my new house. He had never been there because I had kept it as my sanctuary. But it was time. He loved the house. He was impressed with the renovation, the details, the garden, and not in the calculated way Wesley would have been, assessing its value, but genuinely appreciating its beauty. We sat on my living room sofa, that big, comfortable one I'd bought online, a cream-colored L-shaped sofa with soft fabric that was perfect for collapsing on after a long day. And we talked about the future. Nathan asked where I saw this going, us. And I, for the first time, allowed myself to think about it. I said I didn't know, that I liked him a lot, but that I was scared. He asked of what? I said of making the same mistake, of being deceived again. Nathan took my hand and said he couldn't guarantee we would work out, that relationships were hard and nobody had guarantees, but he could guarantee that he would never deceive me, never try to rob me, never manipulate me, and if at any point I felt it wasn't working, I could end it. No drama, no problem, but that I should at least give us a real chance. I looked into his eyes, sincere, honest eyes, and I thought about everything I had been through, the pain, the betrayal, but also the healing, the growth, and I thought, I deserve to be happy. I deserve real love. So I said, okay, we would try. And Nathan smiled, that beautiful smile of his, and kissed me. August and September of 2025 were months of gentle integration. Nathan didn't try to rush anything. We continued to see each other regularly, but each in our own home. He met my book club friends. They loved him and told me he was a keeper. I met his sons on a video call. They were polite, but clearly still loyal to their mother's memory, which I completely understood. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not because I had a man in my life, but because I had built a balanced life. Work, family, friends, love, all in their right places. October arrived with that feeling that finally, my life had found a balance. I had my work, my daughter, my relationship with Nathan that was growing slowly but surely. And for the first time in years, I woke up without that weight on my chest, without that constant fear that something would go wrong. But it's funny how the universe works. Sometimes, when you think you've buried the past, it decides to dig itself up. It was a Tuesday, October 15th, 2025, when I got an unexpected call. I was at the Marietta Clinic, reviewing a new treatment protocol with the team, when my cell phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something made me pick it up this time. The voice on the other end was female, young, hesitant. The woman introduced herself as Jennifer Thornton and said she was Wesley's sister. You guys, my blood ran cold. I literally felt a chill run down my spine. Wesley's sister. I didn't even know he had a sister. In 10 years of marriage, from 2015 to 2023, he had never mentioned any family. He always said he was an only child, that his parents had died when he was young. Another lie, apparently. I was silent, trying to process, and she continued, explaining in that nervous voice that she knew it was strange to call like this, that she would understand if I hung up on her, but that she needed to talk to me about Wesley. And then she said something that gave me goosebumps. She said there were things I needed to know about him, things that went beyond what I already knew. Beyond? What did she mean, beyond? The man had tried to steal almost $500,000 from me, had drugged me, had tried to lock me in a nursing home. What else could there be? But curiosity, or maybe the need to finally understand completely who I had been married to, made me agree to meet with her. She said she was in Atlanta, that she had come from Tampa, Florida, just to talk to me. She had traveled all that way. I set up the meeting at a public neutral coffee shop, the same one where Nathan and I had our first coffee date. I wasn't going to her place, and I wasn't letting her come to mine. And it would be during the day, with people around. I had learned to be cautious. The next day, Wednesday, at 2 p.m, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I chose a table near the window, with my back to the wall, where I could see the door. Old habits from someone who learned the hard way. When she arrived, I knew it was her immediately. She was about 35, 38, white, with brown hair and a simple ponytail, no makeup, wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt. She looked tired, nervous. She sat down across from me, we ordered coffee, and we sat in that awkward silence for a moment. She started by thanking me for agreeing to meet her, said she wasn't sure if I would want to, and I answered honestly that I almost hadn't. She said she understood completely. And then she began by saying she wanted to apologize for what her brother had done to me. I asked her straight out if she knew about the scam, and she swore she didn't, that she had no idea. She explained that she and Wesley hadn't been in contact for years, that the whole family had cut him off a long time ago. And then she started telling a story that made me realize I had been just one in a long line of victims. Jennifer told me that Wesley had always been troubled since he was a kid, that their parents had tried everything, therapy, medication, even boarding school. But he had something broken inside him, a complete lack of empathy. He saw people as tools, as a means to get what he wanted. And then she told me about Patricia. When Wesley was 22, back in 2007, he dated a woman named Patricia who was 38 at the time. Patricia owned a successful beauty salon, and Wesley, according to Jennifer, did exactly what he did to me. He got close to her, won her over, faked love. And when Patricia trusted him enough to give him access to the business accounts, he stole everything and disappeared. He had done it before, the same con, the same strategy. I wasn't the first. Jennifer said that Patricia couldn't prove it in court because she had given him access voluntarily, so legally it was hard to prosecute. Wesley took about $60,000 from her and vanished. His family tried to make him pay it back, but he'd already spent it all. Her parents even paid half of what he stole back to Patricia, trying to do the right thing. But after that, they cut off contact with Wesley completely. They said he was no longer their son. Jennifer had tried to stay in touch for a while, because he was her brother, you know. She thought maybe he would change. But in 2012, he asked to borrow $15,000 from her and her husband, saying he was going through a hard time, needed to pay off debts. They gave him the money, and Wesley disappeared. Never answered her calls again. To this day, he still owed her that money. She wiped away a tear and said that when she saw on the news what Wesley had done to me in 2023, she was disgusted, but not surprised, because it was exactly the kind of thing he would do. Only this time, he had gone much further, much more cruelly. I sat there, processing all of it. It all made sense now. Wesley hadn't chosen me by accident. He had a pattern, a modus operandi. Older, financially successful women that he could manipulate and rob. I asked her why she had come to tell me this now, more than 2 years after everything happened. And she looked me straight in the eye and explained that she had heard Wesley was going to try to appeal his sentence again. And she wanted me to know that he had a history, that I wasn't the first victim, and that if he got out of prison early, he would do it again to someone else. She was emphatic, said that he doesn't change, that he can't change. And then she took a folder out of her purse and put it on the table between us. She said that folder had everything. Statements, documents, names of other victims she had managed to track down over the years. She said there were at least 5 other women besides me and Patricia that Wesley had conned, robbed, or tried to con. None of them had reported it because they were scared or ashamed, but they had agreed to give a statement if necessary. 5 women. 5. Plus me. Plus Patricia. 7 known victims. My God, how many more could there be that no one ever knew about? I asked why they hadn't gone to the police, and Jennifer explained the same reasons many victims don't. Shame for having been deceived, fear of not being believed. Some had given him access to their accounts voluntarily, so they thought they didn't have a legal case. And Wesley was good, very good, at choosing women who had more to lose from public exposure than he did. I opened that folder right there, with trembling hands, and started to leaf through it. There were written statements, copies of bank transactions, photos, emails, a complete documentation of years and years of scams. One of the stories that caught my eye was about a woman named Linda, 56 years old, owner of a restaurant in Jacksonville, Florida. Wesley had dated her for 8 months in 2018. He had stolen $32,000 from her and disappeared. Linda had tried to report it, but he had erased all electronic traces. She didn't have enough proof. There was another story about a woman named Valerie, 49 years old, from Miami. She had met Wesley in 2020, shortly before he met me. He had tried the same con on her, but her son, who was a lawyer, had become suspicious and investigated in time. They kicked Wesley out and he disappeared. That was probably when he decided to come back to Atlanta and ended up finding me. I was just the latest in a long line of women he had destroyed or tried to destroy. And I probably would have been just another one he would have discarded after sucking everything dry if it weren't for my Aria and that video she recorded. Sitting in that coffee shop, reading those accounts, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger because that monster had done this to so many women. Relief because I had escaped, because I had been able to prove it, because he had been caught. I asked Jennifer what she wanted me to do with this information, and she said she wanted me to take it to the district attorney, to Dr. Fletcher, who had handled Wesley's criminal case. She wanted this information to be used to ensure that Wesley stayed in prison for the maximum possible time, and that if he tried to get his sentence reduced, his full history would be presented. She also said something that made me respect her. She said she knew she couldn't undo what her brother had done, but at least she could try to stop him from doing it to other women in the future, and that she was ashamed to carry the Thornton name, knowing what it represented. We stayed in that coffee shop for over 2 hours. Jennifer told me more details about Wesley's childhood, about how their parents had tried and failed to raise a son with empathy. She said his parents had died, yes, but only 3 years ago, in 2022, not when he was young like he always claimed. More lies. Always lies. She told me that Wesley had been expelled from 2 colleges for cheating on exams and forging documents, that he had been fired from 3 jobs for stealing from the cash register, that he had a pattern of fraudulent behavior since he was a teenager. And the more she talked, the more I realized how lucky I had been. Lucky to have a smart daughter who recorded that video. Lucky to have a judge who took the case seriously. Lucky to have been able to recover my money, because the other women hadn't been so lucky. When we finally said goodbye in the coffee shop parking lot, Jennifer hugged me. It was a strange hug, because she was the sister of the man who had tried to destroy me, but it was also a hug of solidarity, from a woman who had also been deceived by him, just in a different way. Before she left, she said that I was the only one who had managed to stop him, that the other women would be grateful for that, even without knowing me, because every day he stayed in prison was a day he couldn't do this to someone else. I went home that day carrying that heavy folder, not just with papers, but with stories. Stories of women who had trusted and been betrayed. Women who, like me, just wanted love and found a predator instead. That night, I told Nathan everything. We were sitting on his living room sofa, Duke, his dog, lying at our feet, and I poured it all out, about Jennifer, about the other victims, about how I was just another one. Nathan listened in silence, holding my hand. And when I finished, he said something that stuck with me. He said I wasn't just another one, that I was the only one who had the courage and the means to fight back, and that I hadn't fought just for myself, I had fought for all of them too, because now he was in prison. And he couldn't do it again. And he was right. I had fought, and I had won. The next day, Thursday, I called Dr. Abernathy and scheduled a meeting. I brought the complete folder that Jennifer had given me. Dr. Abernathy spent hours analyzing everything, taking notes, making calls to confirm information. And at the end of the afternoon, he looked at me and said this was gold. That with this documentation, if Wesley tried for any appeal or sentence reduction, the district attorney could argue that he was a serial offender, a predator with an established pattern of behavior over more than 15 years. This would eliminate any chance of him getting out early. Dr. Abernathy contacted Prosecutor Fletcher, and 2 weeks later, in early November, the prosecutor called me into his office for a meeting. Prosecutor Fletcher was that serious man who had conducted Wesley's criminal trial in August of 2023 with such determination. He reviewed all the documentation Jennifer had provided and was impressed. He said he would incorporate it into the case, that he would contact all of those women to get official statements. And he told me one more thing that put my mind at ease. He said that Wesley had tried to file for a sentence reduction, claiming good behavior in prison. But with this new documentation showing his history, the request would be denied for sure. Wesley would serve his full 15-year sentence, or at the very least 12 with good behavior. No less than that. I left that office feeling a weight lifted, because now I knew Wesley wasn't getting out anytime soon. And when he did, Arya and I would be safe. He would have no rights over us, and hopefully, the whole world would know what kind of man he was. In mid-November, something happened that surprised me. I received a letter, in the mail, in my mailbox at home. The sender was Linda, that woman from Jacksonville who Wesley had robbed in 2018. The letter was handwritten, in beautiful, careful script. Linda wrote that Jennifer had contacted her, had told her about me and the case, and that when she learned I had managed to put Wesley in prison, she had cried with relief. Linda wrote that after Wesley robbed her, she had fallen into a severe depression. She had almost lost her restaurant. She had been ashamed to tell her family what had happened. She had carried it alone for years, thinking it was her own foolishness, that she should have seen the signs. But now, knowing that he was a serial predator, that he had done this to multiple women, she finally understood that it hadn't been her fault, that she had been the victim of a professional con artist. And she ended the letter by saying that she thanked me for having the courage she didn't have, that she thanked me for fighting back, that I had saved women he would have gone on to destroy, that I was her hero, even without knowing me. I cried reading that letter. I cried because I realized that my pain, my struggle, had served a greater purpose. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. In the following weeks, I received 3 more letters, from Valerie, in Miami, from a woman named Sharon, in Savannah, and from another named Teresa, in Charlotte. All of them victims of Wesley at different times, in different cities. All of them thanking me for doing what they couldn't. I kept all those letters in a special box I'd bought online. A beautiful wooden box with gold metal details, lined with red velvet inside. And I kept the letters there because they reminded me of why I had fought, why I couldn't give up. It wasn't just for me and Arya. It was for all the women who had been destroyed by men like Wesley, and for all those who still could be if predators like him weren't stopped. At the end of November, Prosecutor Fletcher called me with some news. Wesley had withdrawn his request for a sentence reduction. Apparently, when his lawyer saw all the new documentation that had surfaced, he advised Wesley to drop it because it would only make things worse for him. If he forced a new hearing, the judge might even increase the sentence instead of reducing it, seeing the established criminal pattern. So Wesley was going to stay put in prison, serving his 15 years, and I could finally close this chapter for good. And that's how we got here. It's been 2 years and 7 months since that terrible day in April of 2023 when my 6-year-old daughter stood up in a courtroom and changed our family's destiny forever. Wesley is in a federal prison in Georgia serving 15 years. He's already served 2 years and 7 months. He still has at least 9.5 years to go for his minimum with good behavior. Chloe is in a women's prison serving 8 years. She's already served 2.5 with at least 3.5 years to go. They both lost everything. Their freedom, the money they tried to steal, their reputations, everything. And me? I got everything back, and more. My 8 beauty clinics are bringing in $3.5 million a year. I've already recovered $408,000 of the $487,000 Wesley stole. The $79,000 that didn't come back? I consider that the price of the most valuable lesson of my life. Arya is 9 now. She's in the 4th grade, loves to draw, has a wonderful group of friends, and most importantly, she's happy. She no longer carries that weight on her shoulders. She's back to being a kid. I have Nathan, a good, honest man who respects me and loves me the right way. We've been together for almost a year. We don't live together yet, and maybe we never will. But we see each other almost every day. And for the first time in a long time, I'm in a relationship where I feel safe. I have a circle of strong friends who support me. I have a new purpose, to help other women who go through what I went through. And I have peace. But let me be clear about one thing. This isn't a fairy tale happy ending story. It's not about finding a Prince Charming who saved me. Because nobody saved me. I saved myself. With the help of my brave daughter, my dedicated lawyer, and a justice system that worked when it was supposed to. But at the end of the day, I was the one who fought. I was the one who survived. I was the one who won. And that victory doesn't erase the trauma. I still have hard days. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with my heart pounding. I still get tense when a strange man is too nice to me too quickly. I still obsessively check my bank accounts every week. The trauma doesn't just disappear because you won. It stays there, a scar you carry. But with time, with therapy, with support, that scar hurts less, and you learn to live with it. I've learned that trusting again is possible, but it has to be a smart trust. Not that blind trust I had in Wesley. It's a trust that comes with verification, with healthy boundaries, with paying attention to the signs. I've learned that age is not a weakness. Wesley used my age against me, made me believe that being in my 50s meant I was washed up, outdated, confused. But at 53, I'm stronger, smarter, and more capable than I ever was at 30. I've learned that financial success attracts predators, and that successful women need to be especially careful. Not because we're weak, but because we're targets. And there's no shame in being cautious, in investigating, in protecting what's yours. I've learned that family isn't always who shares your blood. Family is who supports you when you're at rock bottom. It's Simone and the other managers who quietly documented everything. It's Denise who dropped everything in Nashville to come support me in court. It's Dr. Patricia who helped me heal. It's Aria, always Aria, my 6-year-old hero. I've learned that justice is possible. Not always. Not for everyone. I had privileges that many women don't have. I had built a net worth that gave me the resources to fight. I had a daughter who had the courage and intelligence to record that video. I was lucky. But even with all that luck, I still had to fight. And fight hard. And that's why I decided to use my story to help other women. Because not all of them have the resources I had. Not all of them have a life-saving video. Not all of them can prove it. The fund I started has already helped 12 women escape situations of financial abuse. 12 women who are free, safe, rebuilding. And I plan to grow that fund. I plan to help many more. Because Wesley wasn't an isolated case. There are thousands of Wesleys out there. Men, and sometimes women, who see relationships as business opportunities. Who choose partners not for love, but for money. Who manipulate, steal, destroy, and they need to be stopped. Wesley's other victims, Patricia, Linda, Valerie, Sharon, Teresa, they all sent me letters or messages thanking me. But I'm the one who thanks them. Because without the documentation that Jennifer gathered, without their testimonies, Wesley might have gotten his sentence reduced. He might have gotten out early. But now he's not getting out. Not anytime soon. And when he does get out, in 9.5 years or more, Aria and I will be safe. Legally, he has no more rights over her. He relinquished them. She's all mine. And financially, I'll be even stronger. Because I haven't stopped. I'm still growing. Because Wesley wanted to stop me. He wanted to make me believe I was too old, too slow, that my best days were behind me. But he was wrong. My best days are now, and they're still to come. I look at Aria sleeping in her room, safe, happy, without fear, and I know it was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of terror in that courtroom. It was worth it because she's safe, because she will grow up knowing that women can fight and win. That age is power, that a mother who builds an empire doesn't let herself be destroyed. Nathan asked me the other day if I regretted marrying Wesley. If I could go back in time, would I have avoided that day in January of 2013 when I met him at the gym? And I thought long and hard before I answered. The answer is no. Because if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have Arya. And she is the best thing that ever happened to me. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have learned the lessons I learned. I wouldn't have the strength I have. I wouldn't have the purpose I've found. The suffering wasn't in vain. It was transformed into wisdom, into courage, into purpose. And that's what I want to make clear to any woman who is listening to this story and recognizes herself in it. If you're in a relationship where your partner makes you feel incompetent, old, confused, if he's taking control of your finances, if he's isolating you from your friends, your family, if you feel like you're losing yourself, if you have that feeling that something is wrong, but he always convinces you that you're overreacting, that you're paranoid, that you're the problem, you are not the problem. You are being manipulated. And you can get out. You can fight. You can win. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it is possible. Document everything. Every strange transaction, every suspicious conversation, every abusive behavior. Keep copies in safe places he can't access. Consult a lawyer discreetly. Don't confront him until you have proof and a plan. And when you have proof, when you have a plan, when you have support, fight. Fight with everything you've got, because you deserve it, because your money is yours, because your life is yours, because you are not too old, not too confused, not too weak. You are strong enough. I promise. Because if I could do it, you can too. Sitting in my beautiful house in Druid Hills, with my daughter sleeping safely upstairs, with Nathan coming over for dinner soon, with my 8 thriving clinics, with my bright future ahead of me, I can say with absolute certainty, I won. Not because I destroyed Wesley, he destroyed himself, but because I rebuilt myself, better, stronger, wiser than before. And if you're going through what I went through, know this, you will win too. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not at the same speed, but you will, because women like us, we are indestructible. Wesley Thornton tried to break me. He failed, and any man who tries to do that to you, he will fail too, because we are stronger than they will ever be. And you, what would you do in my shoes? Do you think I did the right thing? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so the channel can keep bringing more stories like this. Thanks for all the love. On the screen, you'll see another story I'm sure you'll love. Click on it to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.